Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September 18th, 2023 Vermont Nuclear Decommission Citizens Advisory Panel. My name is Lissa Weinman. I am the vice chair of the panel, and I am stepping in tonight for Steve Skibniewski, who is unable to attend. The meeting is being recorded and will appear on Brattleboro Community Television later on, as it always does. And we have a Zoom link for those attending virtually, no physical meeting place for this meeting tonight. We have a full agenda, and I'm going to run through that right now. But I guess basically, we will start with the panel roll call to confirm that we have quorum. We're going to review and approve the minutes from the May 8th committee meeting, which was the last full panel committee meeting. We're going to have a brief discussion of the panel chair status. We'll have an update from NorthStar on the VY site decommissioning activities. Then we'll move to the state agencies' decommissioning status reports, including the Natural Resources Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Public Service on the decommissioning fund status, and also the Department of Health and additional state agencies if necessary. Then there'll be a panel Q&A on NorthStar and the state reports. Then we'll open it up at about 7:35 to a public Q&A on the NorthStar and state agency reports. And after that, we'll have some general public comments available mid-meeting for those who can't wait for the public comments at the end. We'll have a Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee update and a discussion of potential panel budget expenditures. And there was a budget that was provided prior to the meeting and the meeting materials to inform that discussion. There'll be a discussion of potential future meeting topics, and then we will close with general public comments and a meeting wrap-up. At this point, are there any amendments to be heard from either panel members or the public on this proposed agenda at this time? Or any new business that should be considered as part of this agenda tonight? If not, let's proceed to a panel roll call. I'll read out people's names, and if you could just identify yourself as present, and whether you're a citizen appointee or what agency you're representing, please. We'll start with me. I'm Lissa Weinman, vice chair. I'm a citizen appointee by the former Senate President Pro Tem Becca Ballant. And next, let's move to Madeline Arms.
I am a representative for the town of Vernon, present.
Great. I believe Chris Campany is not with us tonight.
That's correct.
Okay. Corey Daniels.
Hi, Corey Daniels, NorthStar representative.
Emily Davis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Emily Davis. I am a citizen appointee also of the Senate President Pro Tem.
David Eastman.
Hi, I'm here. I'm a citizen member of the panel, the Speaker of the House.
Great. Bill Irwin.
Good evening, Bill Irwin. I represent the Agency of Human Services. I work for the Vermont Department of Health.
Great. Hi, Bill. Bob Leach.
I do not think he's on at this time.
Okay. David Pearson.
Good evening, everyone. David Pearson, NorthStar representative, present.
I don't think Todd Amato is here. The second representative for the town of Vernon, is he on board? No.
I received a message from him last evening indicating that he was unavailable this evening. So.
Okay. Trish Capolino? Unmute, please.
Sorry, Trish Capolino with the Agency of Natural Resources.
Okay. June Tierney?
Yes, good evening. June Tierney, Commissioner, Vermont Department of Public Service.
Hello, Commissioner.
Hi there.
Brett Long?
I'm Brett Long. I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development, and I'm a designee for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Vermont State Senator Mark McDonald? I don't think that he's on and has not really been attending the meetings, unfortunately, but let's move on to Marvin Reznikov. Does not appear as if Marvin Reznikov is here. And State Representative Laura Sibilia.
Yes, I am here representing the Environment and Energy Committee.
Great.
In the House.
Welcome, Representative Sibilia. Thank you for being here tonight. Is there anybody I've missed, Tony, that you're aware of?
I think that's everyone that I've seen, but if anyone else on the panel has been missed, please speak now.
Okay, I think we have quorum, so we'll be able to move forward with an approval of the May 8th meeting minutes. Are there any changes from any panel members regarding the minutes that were provided to you previous to this meeting?
Yes, I'd like to strike line 16, page 2, starting with cleanup at sites undergoing remediation. That's not part of my experience. I hope I actually didn't say that, but I do have assessing hazardous materials, so just end the sentence there.
Okay, so just to be clear on line 16, page 2, and experience in assessing hazardous materials cleanup, and leave it at that?
No, just materials. Put the period after materials.
Okay, absolutely.
And strike cleanup at sites undergoing remediation?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other clarifications or edits to the May 8th minutes? Seeing none, I would move through a panel vote to approve the minutes. Can we simply do a show of hands or an eye, or do we need to do a roll call, Tony?
For this, I think ayes and nays will work. If people want to do a roll call, that's up to them.
Okay. I think we could just, if anybody has any nays, you can express it now. Otherwise, we will consider everyone to have. Is that?
I'm sorry. Did we get a motion to approve?
Oh, no.
I'll move to. I'll so move.
Is there a second to the?
A second.
All right. So let's then move to the. If there show of hands to approve the May 8th meeting minutes, vote yay.
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 Okay. Do I hear any nays or abstentions?
Abstain.
Laura Sibilia has abstained. Okay, so I believe that we have approved the May 8th meeting minutes with one abstention from Laura Sibilia. Great. Oh, Brett? Oh, you're just voting to say yay. Okay, great. Right? Okay.
That's correct.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for that. We will now move to a brief discussion of the panel chair status. Is Steve on the phone now, Tony?
I don't see him, but we can just take a quick check. No, I don't see anyone identifying as a Steve on here, so I'm going to assume that he is unavailable.
That's perfectly understandable. Do you want to just briefly inform the panel as to what's happening regarding the chair status?
Right. Okay, so let me preface this by saying that I have Steve's permission to discuss this, so we're not getting into any HIPAA issues with me sharing this. But a number of weeks ago, Steve Skibnowski, who's serving as panel chair up until this evening, notified me that he had been diagnosed with a tumor. Cancerous tumors. So he is undergoing treatment for that. And even though his oncologist had indicated that the type of tumor that he has is readily treatable and there's minimal side effects normally from either chemo or radiation treatment for this. He nonetheless has been rather weakened by the treatment, and he has had some bad reactions to it. So as a result, he has stated that he would prefer to step back from chairmanship of the panel, simply because right now he's having difficulty having the energy to do the preparations necessary for that. Under the panel rules, when the panel chair is unavailable, the panel vice chair is the first choice for running a meeting such as this evening, and that's why Lissa is running tonight's meeting or I should say, is chairing tonight's meeting. Beyond that, the panel, the panel chair, panel vice chair positions are elected positions for up to 1 year. The last election for panel chair and panel vice chair was in December. So Steve's original plan was to serve through the end of this year, but at this point he is unable to do so. He does hope to continue as a citizen appointee to the panel, just not in the chairmanship right now. So that's where we are. I don't know if anyone on the panel has any questions or if any discussion is needed, on what the panel wants to do at this point. I do see that we have a hand raised from one member of the public. So, Lissa, that's up to you if you want to take any public comments at this point.
No, I think it's not appropriate to take the public comment now before we hear from the other panel members, Tony. Okay. I will say that we tend as a panel to do elections for the chair and vice chair at our December meeting. The next meeting would be December 11th. So I am willing to step in as vice chair to preside if Steve is unable at that December 11th meeting, at which point we would select a new chair for the year ahead in 2024. So I just wanted to put that forth, that I am willing and able to do that as vice chair. But let's hear from anyone else from the panel members themselves. Are there any other thoughts on this? Does that sound appropriate? Do we need to have a vice chair at this point if I'm going to be acting chair till the end of the year, Tony, in case something happens to me, God forbid, I can't go December 11th?
That's a good question. The legislation establishing the panel discusses the option of either a chair and vice chair or two co-chairs. What we also have is, if there is an interim instance where a chair and vice chair are unavailable, the chairmanship falls to the Public Service Commissioner ex officio. And I notice June is now nodding her head, and she had her hand raised before. Commissioner, I don't know if you wish to add anything to that, but that is my understanding of everything right now. Whether we need to have a vice chair at this point, the legislation is silent on it. So
I would suggest we don't overthink this, Madam Chair. Thank you for stepping in. That is the role of a vice chair. So appreciate you doing that, Lissa. And should something happen to you, God forbid, then it would simply come to me. I don't think we need to overthink it.
Great. I think that's the appropriate decision myself. So there's no need for any kind of vote or anything on that. Then we'll just proceed ahead. Would the member of the public like to weigh in very quickly, please?
I just want to say that Emily has her hand raised.
Oh, Emily does. I don't see that on my screen.
Okay, yeah, I'm just noticing it now. So my apologies for that.
Emily?
Sorry. Yeah, no, thank you, Lissa. And thank you, David. I just wanted to offer to Steve just some well wishes and for wishing him a speedy recovery. And that's hard news, but confident that, he's prioritizing the right things and taking a step back and focusing on healing. And Lissa, to the extent, thank you for stepping in on this meeting. And if you continue to be available, that sounds great. And also thank you for doing that and for being a wonderful vice chair.
Thank you.
And I think the plan is you presented it, and as we agreed, all sounds great. So
great.
That is all.
I think it's a good plan, and I'll second Emily's well wishes to Steve.
Yes. I think everyone on the panel appreciates Steve's service and wishes him well. There was a hand raised from a member of the public, and I will allow that at this point if it's short and relevant. Anne? You're muted.
You're mute. Yes.
I raised my hand before this agenda item. This is not related to Steve. I certainly wish him well. I just wondered if the other folks who are here could introduce themselves. Something I've requested in the past.
You mean the members of the public?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's save that till the public comments if people want to do it, because we do only have Representative Sibilia here for a short time, and I want to make certain that she has a chance to hear the NorthStar report, which would come next. So if members of the public would like to identify themselves when we have the public comment period, I would welcome that for those who want to. And aside from that, let's move forward then with Corey Daniels at the NorthStar decommissioning presentation. Corey.
Thanks, Lissa. Just wait for Tony to put it up on the screen.
Okay. Yeah. Bear with me for just a moment. Okay, it should be up. There we go.
All right,
can folks see it?
You may want to take that full screen. Some of the photos are pretty big.
Okay.
Great.
All right, next slide, please. So as always, we start off the slide deck with a reminder that we try to keep our priorities very straightforward. And we have a target zero agenda with all the efforts for the decommissioning. That includes the radiological, environmental, industrial, and nuclear safety aspects. And our goal is to make sure we're doing things right. And by doing it right, it mostly means doing it safe. Next slide, please. This is the project schedule overview. Again, this slide has been on many of the last presentations. It effectively demonstrates that all the significant large component removals and then buildings will be taken down pretty much through the end of next year, and then all the site restoration and site survey activities through 2026. Next slide, please. As far as performance updates goes, what we call our safety record acceptable, because we're never satisfied with anything better than perfect. Our record so far has been outstanding. We're up to 1.6 million person hours worked on site since NorthStar acquired from my Yankee and became a nuclear licensee. We've had 0 recordable lost time accidents. It's a very rare feat in our industry and even in the nuclear industry in general for that amount of time with that amount of work hours. And every day we remind our folks that it's their efforts and it's them staying engaged and watching out for each other that make that happen. So we'll keep that effort up. Our regulatory performance remains very good with no cited violations. We just had a triennial security inspection with the NRC wrap up last week, and we continue that record. I'm very proud of the team for making that happen. Production, definitely on track. We'll add a schedule in multiple areas, and some of the pictures coming up will demonstrate that. Next slide, please. So big on the agenda was taking down the turbine building. So all the piping, equipment, components got removed from these structures. You can see about 1/3 of the turbine building superstructure is down in this photo. Go to the next slide. And then in this photo, apologize for being a little further away, but it's hard to get in there when they got big machines working and they're dropping large steel. But then we're down to the last, I'll call it 3 frames of the turbine bay superstructure, and those all came down just the way they were planned with no incidents. Next slide, please. And then you can see the large machines go to work, starting to remove all the remainder of the steel so we can get to the massive amounts of concrete that hold up the turbine, known as the turbine pedestal, and all the structural steel for the lower portion of the, I'll call it the ground floor of the turbine building. Next slide, please. And you can see one of our largest machines going to work on that concrete in this photo. For scale, it's kind of hard to see. There's a road cone in the foreground off to the left, but that machine is about a 250,000 pound machine. Next slide, please. And there it is going to work on all the concrete and rebar. And again, for scale, if you look underneath of the arm of that large excavator, right underneath of the word NorthStar, you can see actually a person on a lift who's spraying some water for dust control while those activities are happening. That gives you an idea how big that equipment is. Next slide. All the turbine building structural steel was brought down and set aside, and we're doing everything we can to recycle all of it. Obviously, it requires a significant amount of surveying activity to make sure that it's all clean to do so, but we're feeling that's the right thing to do, and it's pretty much what we're learning is about a break even to shipping it all to Texas, but the amount of safety that we improve without shipping all that extra material and being able to recycle it is a benefit all the way around. So we'll keep and continue doing that work until it proves either not cost effective or we find material that we can't recycle. But so far we're able to recycle all of it. Next slide, please. Continue to demo other large areas. There was a significant concrete pad underneath the 500,000 gallon condensate storage tank. This was in the courtyard, which was kind of between the turbine and reactor building, behind what was once the advanced off-gas building, which has also been demolished. Next slide, please. And while we're doing all the grade and subgrade work, we also went after another very large transformer pad. This was for a spare main transformer we had on site but didn't need to use while we were in operation, but all that concrete had to go. So we put the machines to work, and just to maximize our efficiency and keep all of them moving, that work's happening at the same time. So you see a theme here that we're doing quite a bit of the physical work for all the concrete and the portions of the demo that start to get into the subgrade work. Next slide. So there's another picture of a pretty large machine removing one section of the stacked ducting. So pretty big concrete, basically vent pipe that went out to the stack. Next slide, please. And you can see the trench work associated with removing those lines, those subgrade lines. And while it looks very wet, that's all from rainwater. It has nothing to do with the process. The lines were all empty. But those pipes are coming out, and that large vent duct came out of these trenches as well. Basically, the first picture on the left, you can see the corner of the reactor building. And then the picture on the right, you're backing way up to almost where the stack was. And you're still looking at the very corner of that same reactor building, but it gives you an idea how long that trench is. And that's about 20 feet deep. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of it after it stopped raining, which I guess that's not really a true statement this summer, since it's pretty much the day of the summer. But it did happen for a day, and we got a photo of it. Basically, you're looking at some rope and a sign, and we maintain isolation and controls over these areas after they've been surveyed until the confirmatory surveys can be done. And this survey area becomes part of a survey unit, and then that becomes a piece of the completed decommissioning from a radiological standpoint. But we'll backfill all that at the point that that's done. Next slide, please. And then same thing, I have more updated photos, but you have to wait till December to see them. This has pretty much all been filled in now, but that's looking at the reactor building. And you can still see this as a ways back when the superstructure, a portion of it was still standing for the turbine building off the distance there. But that's that very large 1.6 million gallon volume that was beneath the west cooling tower. And that's pretty much all backfilled now. Next slide. And then preparation, all the building and structure above the discharge structure has been removed. All the equipment is out, and the preparations are in place, and the permit is active. We're actually rerouting a drain line that left from the structure area and went to the river. It's kind of part of the storm drain system. Once that's done, we'll actually start demolishing this discharge structure down to 4 feet below grade, and then start filling it all back in and flushing it out, even with the river bank, and make all that slope into the natural grade and do some replanting to stabilize it in accordance with the approved plan for doing that work. Next slide. And again, that's just another picture looking down into that area in the forebay. So from those grates would be the circ water lines that went back towards the stack and the plant area. Next slide. So this, now we're moving on to inside of the reactor building. What we call the IPSI room, high pressure coolant injection turbine, used to live in this space. This is one of our pieces of emergency equipment. And you can see we have some machines in there, but we're cutting all the small bore piping out. The actual high pressure coolant injection turbine has already been removed, but these rooms are all being emptied. Basically the same protocols we did with all the turbine building. We will empty out all of the reactor building, leave it in a similar condition to where we can take the superstructure down and then go after all the concrete. And that'll probably happen sometime towards the third quarter next year. Next slide. This is looking down into one of the other corner rooms. So there are 4 corner rooms of a square building that went around the big round circumferential basement area where the tours used to be. And this is looking down into one of those other corner rooms where we also had emergency equipment, residual heat removal, and core spray systems. The large heat exchangers are coming out. These are basically the last components in here that you can see now almost empty, and you can see a diamond wire saw cutting through the bottom of that heat exchanger. But basically, you're looking at a room that used to be chock-a-block full of equipment and piping and components is nearly empty. Next slide. So another area, the top picture, would be the entrance to what we call the steam tunnel area. This is kind of a room that transitioned between the space where the reactor lived, known as the containment or the dry well, and the steam piping and systems that left the reactor building and went into the turbine building. And the lower left corner looks kind of like a wall with some pipes sticking out of it. That's pretty much what it is, but there was massive structural and seismic brackets and girders that held all these lines in place. And then the bottom right corner picture, you can see a person standing in there to give you some scale. It's not a very user-friendly room to walk around in or take photos or get a scale of, but the photos don't do it that much justice, but no, a lot of materials coming out of there as well. Next slide. So the Taurus demolition is complete. Starting on the upper left-hand side, you can see a lot of piping and material on the ground. Those were pipes and system equipment and components that were around the periphery of the Taurus. And if you look directly down the bottom left-hand picture, you could see what would be the bottom of that dry well, that reactor cavity space or reactor containment space. The reactor cavity used to be inside of there, just above it. And one of those big lines was called the downcomer lines. It used to come out of that, where at one point it was connected to the Taurus, the big donut-shaped tank that went all the way around that building space. And then on the right-hand side, just gives you a little more scale for how big that room is and the remainder of the pipes and equipment that are coming out of there. But it's getting emptied out pretty quick. Next slide, please. And now that we don't have a turbine loading bay, we load most of our rail cars either in one of the big top tents that you can kind of see in the background on the left-hand side, or depending on what the material is, large super sacks, we set them down into rail cars in this open area just in front of it. Next slide. So a little more photographic evidence of the waste loading and transportation efforts. Every time I put these slides together, these are new pictures and none of these are recycled. So these are from the actual period of time from the last NDCAP. So know that this is what we're doing in that big top tent that we could see there. And on the bottom picture, you can see a little bit of structural steel remaining in front of the reactor building. So the turbine building demo is in progress. We're still loading material out at that point. Next slide. So we're still making very good progress and keeping up with all our targets for getting the material off site. We're over 700 shipments now. I put this material together a couple of weeks ago. You can see we're up to almost over 78 million pounds of material. The one thing you'll notice if you look at these slides from meeting to meeting is the total activity level that we've shipped off site doesn't really go up anymore very much. The last few things that were in the reactor building that had any significant dose, and there is a little bit of the system piping that's inside the dry well that will have a little bit too, but nothing like the materials that we sent out in the beginning when we were cutting the reactor up and getting rid of those things. So my point is the radiological hazard and component of the decommissioning is reducing all the time, and it's becoming a far less challenging component of the decommissioning. Next slide. So what else is going on? Not a whole lot of change. Now that we're just about to the point where we're getting under some of the slabs, we will work in greater concert with A&R and their contracted group to coordinate for the sampling to validate that the few areas of concern that were previously identified are checked and tested, and that we will do the couple of remediations that we have planned with A&R's input to clean up those areas where we know there was some diesel fuel or something spilled in the ground. But for the most part, We continue to have our biweekly calls with the state agencies as needed and coordinate any permit activities and inspections for whichever piece of work lends itself to needing that help. In the middle there, you can see, just to talk through the acronyms, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer individual stream wall permit from the Agency of Natural Resources. As I mentioned before, we started the work on the discharge structure. We likely won't touch the intake structure until next fall. Next slide. So that's kind of the end of it. Another day where it wasn't raining. Took a little shot there, got a sunset. At the end of the day, the good amount of that turbine building pedestal and that concrete that's on the bottom area is gone. I'd say a good half of what you see there has already been taken down, and they're making great progress on it. But we're on track with our target zero, and we're making good progress. And that's my report. Pending any questions.
Thank you, Corey. We will now move to the Agency of Natural Resources presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. My name's Graham Bradley with Waste Management and Prevention Division of Vermont DEC, Agency of Natural Resources. One or two of I'm basically filling out into 5 slides what Corey covered in 1 slide on the non-radiological side of things. For us, it has been a little quieter since May, since our last meeting, as NorthStar make progress with the above ground demolition and decommissioning. So DEC's role here, regulate according to the various Vermont rules, including the contaminated investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule, looking specifically at non-radiological contaminant issues. We also host the bi-weekly meeting with other agencies, NorthStar and Haley and Aldrich. Provide oversight of the non-rad site investigation and remediation, and some of the permitting programs of relevance, which I'll mention in a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so the groundwater monitoring is actually suspended at the moment. We started off with 70 monitoring wells around the site in order to, as part of the investigation, to look to see if and where there was any non-radiological contamination associated with fuel oil, etc. That was brought down in the next year, 2021, to 19 wells, where analysis had shown a contaminant, but not necessarily above the Vermont standards. And eventually we ended up with 4 wells where there was contaminants above the standards. And they were mainly associated with areas where we are going to be conducting soil remediation. But there was also noticed that there was PFAS in 1 or 2 wells just above the Vermont standards. These are the contaminants you sometimes see known as forever chemicals. And so I did ask NorthStar and their consultant to go back and take some more groundwater samples to clarify the distribution of of those PFAS in groundwater. The standard at the moment is 20 parts per trillion. The highest numbers we've seen, generally they're just into the 20s and 30s. This last round we saw 1 and 2 up to 57 parts per trillion. And they are confined to 2 areas, down gradient of leach fields on site. We have seen this elsewhere with larger sort of institutions and schools in Vermont. PFAS, we're not exactly sure of the products where it came from at Vermont Yankee, but it is associated with some cleaning products and floor waxes, etc. So it's probably quite likely that that went down the drain into the leach field, and hence we're seeing some PFAS in the groundwater. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we move forward. Following demolition, there will be some monitoring wells reinstalled, so we can check on the status of petroleum contaminants, see if they've all been removed, and we'll be keeping an eye on the PFAS as well once demolition is completed, see if those numbers reduce or if ongoing monitoring is required. Next slide, please. Okay, this is really just a repeat of the slide I've shown in the last couple of presentations. We're all ready to go with what we call the corrective action plans, the contaminated soil excavation and disposal off-site, and replacement with clean backfill in two areas that were identified where there were appear to have been to be contaminated soils associated with oil storage tanks in these two locations. So this is likely to occur next year once demolition of the turbine hole is complete. Next slide, please. And one thing that is not really part of our usual process these post-demo surveys, post-demolition surveys, we weren't able to access, or Haley and Aldrich weren't able to access all locations during the initial investigation because there was buildings and concrete pads, etc., in the way. So in areas where there is a possibility or low possibility of ground contamination, non-radiological, they're conducting post-demo surveys, observations, and meters on site, and soil sampling if necessary. So they're continuing with that, and we're providing oversight of that as the areas become available. We're waiting on a report from post-demo surveys done this year in connection with transformer pads. Nothing was identified during those surveys, but I'll be reviewing that report when we get that. There was also an extra bit of due diligence done by NorthStar. I think it was actually Corey noticed on an older plan, a 1988 plan, down gradient of Governor Hunt House. Someone had recorded possible presence of an oil at 9 foot deep when they were installing a monitoring plan. That was the only record of this, and doing due diligence, Haley and Aldrich put a test pit in that area down to 10 feet, observed those soils, and took soil samples, got those analyzed, and they came back with no evidence of contaminant impacts. So that was good to confirm. Next slide, please. And again, this is just my final slide. I don't think there's any change really from May. Just the other DEC programs that are involved. We have the hazardous waste program. The site is now what they define as a small quantity generator. The residuals program, that's for land spreading of septage. They did all of their necessary soil and groundwater testing and have now ended that certification, showing that it met all of their standards following the end of that program. There's ongoing routine compliance monitoring with the public well on site. No change to the direct discharge program. I mean, that permit is still valid, although that's not being used at the moment, I understand. There was a routine annual inspection of the the ISFAC, the spent fuel storage facility, and the Rivers program issued their stream alteration permit. I think it was actually just before our last meeting back in May. And as Corey pointed out and showed some pictures, that work is now underway to demolish that structure down to 4 feet and beneath the ground level, and then that will be backfilled and the bank reinstated there according to the approved permit. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say this evening.
Okay. Next, we just want to clarify, do we have a report from Bill Irwin tonight? I don't see it on the agenda. Tony, there's no Department of Health report.
Sorry, my unmute was sticking. No, Bill did not forward anything to me, but I think he's still online here if there's anything he wants to add.
Okay, well, let's move to the Department of Public Service report then. And if Bill has a report regarding radiological monitoring, I would like to hear that if possible. But let's move to Department of Public Service, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Guzman. I'm an attorney with the Vermont Department of Public Service within the Public Advocacy Division. I'm here just to provide a brief overview of the department's role and an update of the current funding to complete decommissioning since the NDCAP's last meeting in May. Joining me on the call are the department's financial and technical consultants, Nicholas Kapik and Mark Amir, who provide input on the department's oversight for the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. Next slide, please, Tony. All right. So the department, for anyone who's new and joining us today, the Department of Public Service is charged through the 2018 Memorandum of Understanding approved by the Vermont Public Utility Commission to conduct an ongoing review of the financial performance and technical progress of the Vermont Yankee decommissioning and site restoration work. On the financial side, the department reviews the financial performance of the project, including cash flows. The department analyzes the financial health of NorthStar and its corporate affiliates, as well as assesses the viability of the MOU's financial assurances necessary to fund decommissioning and site restoration work. On the technical side, the department confirms that the work performed by NorthStar is reasonable and consistent with the withdrawals taken from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust and the Site Restoration Trust. And the department also evaluates the project to identify any risks or concerns that could challenge successful completion of the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. As part of the department's review, the department receives reporting from NorthStar on a monthly basis, which includes decommissioning progress report, updated project schedule, as well as pay item disbursement and earned value reporting documents. The department also receives a 30-day notice of any intended distributions from the Site Restoration Trust for any site restoration work. The department also conducts monthly meetings with NorthStar for follow-up on any information requests that we may have on NorthStar's monthly and annual reporting. We also have monthly meetings with A&R to discuss and review project progress. The department's consultant also regularly conducts site visits every few months to verify project progress. And much of the monthly and annual financial reporting is confidentially designated material. However, all of the publicly available reporting, including the trust balances, as well as a high-level pay item disbursement summary and the annual public report, are published on the department's Vermont Yankee decommissioning page. All right, next slide, please, Tony. So this slide contains a list of disbursements from the NDT and SRT since the NDCAP's last May 2023 meeting. Prior to withdrawal from either trust, NorthStar provides the department a 30-day notice of those disbursements. In the department, as it relates to the Site Restoration Trust, the department has the authority to object to any disbursements from the SRT within that 30-day time frame. Additionally, the NRC receives a 30-day notice of disbursement from the NDT, and the department receives a copy of that notice as well on a monthly basis. So as of August 31st, the NDT balance is roughly $132.8 million, and the SRT balance is roughly $50.8 million, and all disbursements listed here for work that has already been completed. Next slide, please, Tony. So the slide contains a table of the end of month trust balances since April of this year. Below that table is a summary of three types of activities. The license termination activities, which encompass the safe removal of any radioactive material and the removal of the Vermont Yankee facilities. That total cost is $536.2 million. As of the end of August of this year, $397.8 million has been conducted and earned by NorthStar, leaving approximately $138.4 million remaining to complete license termination work. The current balance for the NDT is $132.8 million as of August 31st. But I will, like the last NDCAP, I'll provide a little context for that apparent discrepancy in the next slide. As far as spent fuel management costs, those total $290.9 million, with NorthStar having earned $29.8 million as of August, leaving $261.1 required to manage spent fuel until its removal. And NorthStar anticipates collecting an additional $276.5 million from the United States Department of Energy for spent fuel management costs through settlement or judgments against the Department of Energy. And then finally, site restoration costs, which encompass the cleanup of any non-radiological contamination to satisfy Vermont and federal standards, totals $25 million. NorthStar has earned $15.7 million, leaving $9.3 left to complete site restoration work. And the site restoration fund contains $50.9 million as of August. Next slide, please, Tony. So our consultants from Four Points Group conducted a site visit in June of this year, which included observation of work activities in the turbine building, reactor building, refueling floor, and external areas. No conditions observed during that June site visit were inconsistent with project progress reported by NorthStar in its May status report. Our consultant will be conducting another site visit this month to confirm most recent progress reports. And regarding the discrepancy on the NDT balance is reflective of current market conditions that assume an unrealized loss on that trust balance, and does not account for quarterly interest payments on those treasury securities. The NDT is exclusively invested in U.S. Treasury securities with laddered maturity dates. And as those securities approach maturity, the value normalizes. And that unrealized loss that's reflected in the current NDT balance would only be realized if those securities were sold prior to their maturity date. And NorthStar has held those securities until maturity. The value of the NDT without the unrealized loss on those securities is 136.3 million. Additionally, the continuing interest gained on the NDT is expected to meet the remaining value needed for license termination work. And then finally, as a reminder, the 2018 MOU has a number of additional financial assurances if there is ever any need for additional funding beyond that NDT balance to fund license termination work. That includes a $140 million support agreement from NorthStar's parent company, NorthStar Group Services, to pay for any additional expenses. And if that were to ever come short, we would then move to another financial assurance, which is the $55 million financial assurance escrow that's available for any additional costs necessary. So based on the monthly and annual financial reporting that we've received to date, NorthStar appears to be on course to complete the project with available funding. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we can move to questions or comments from panel members on the NorthStar decommissioning report, as well as the state agencies. And I don't see the report from the Department of Health, but I'm wondering if Bill Irwin would mind giving us a brief update on radiological monitoring at Vermont Yankee. Bill, are you there? You might be muted still, Bill, if you're trying to talk. While we're trying to resolve this, are there any other comments from panel members? Oh, here he is. Okay.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So the Department of Health is working with the Agency of Natural Resources, Public Service, and occasionally others on twice monthly teleconferences with Vermont Yankee NorthStar. We also conduct periodic inspections of the site. We continue our environmental surveillance around the site, specifically air samples, water samples, direct gamma radiation measurements. And we review all of the radioactive material shipments as they go out of the site and check those against the reports that are received here, like the one tonight, with the total number of shipments that have been sent out. As of the date, we are very confident in the work that's happening there. We obviously are relying on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the direct surveillance and oversight of the decommissioning, as it is their jurisdiction. But we keep a close ear and eye to all of the things that are going on there to try to represent the needs of Vermonters more directly. That's all I would report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other comments and questions from panel members? And I will rely on Tony if there's hands raised that I can't see regarding any of the decommissioning activities or reports.
I'll just say that Corey hosted me for a morning soon after, just to thank him for helping me get onboarded and really gave me a good perspective of being on site of just how massive a job it is and how thorough they are in their work processes. So I just wanted to publicly and to the panel thank him for that time.
Most welcome, David.
I had a question. I guess it's for Corey. Just regarding, you showed us those pictures of the former courtyard demolition, and I know that was the site of those the tritium leaks in the past. And I'm just wondering, how is there more scrutiny going into that area regarding potential radiological issues in that particular area of concern? Or?
So list of the process by which all the surveys and samples are done to ensure that the site is cleaned up to the standards required. Don't exempt any area, and in fact, any space that ever had a file. It's a 10 CFR 75 golf file for any activity that happened, like the condensate storage water you're talking about. That area will get looked at and carefully monitored, and we will do samples. But we've done that previously with the repairs that occurred and the prior monitoring efforts that we did, and we even shared and made that information public with the Department of Health during that whole period following that 2009-2010 timeframe. But
right.
We'll make sure that system means it needs to be to ensure the site meets all required standards.
Okay. And one final question for Bill Irwin. I just I noted that there hadn't been any surveillance reports issued on the Department of Health website since 2019, but is that because the NRC has taken the lead during decommissioning, or I'm just curious why, those surveillance reports, if they are available, are not up on the website at this point? I think if you are trying to answer, I think you might be muted, Bill. I'm sorry. I can't see you on my screen.
He said in the chat that he had to go to his town planning committee meeting because he's the chair.
Okay. Well, I would just like to say that I think that, I, as a panel member, would like to see a Department of Health status report in our regular meetings, akin to what we get from the Agency of Natural Resources. I think it's important that be done, just for the record. And I'm sure that Bill will answer us, perhaps, put it on public record, or, I'll follow up with him individually following the meeting. But seeing no other panel questions or comments on the state or the NorthStar report, I'd like to turn it to public comments or questions at this point. And I want to turn first to Paul Blanche, who had requested 5 minutes of our time regarding a visit and some questions he had specifically for NorthStar. So I would turn it over first to Mr. Blanche. Go ahead.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the time. You guys are doing a very good job, I think, compared to some of the others I've seen. Do you have my slides, or can I share screen? But before I get to that, there's one question I had about Bill Irwin's presentation, which seems to be a big question a lot of other decommissioning sites are, and it's too bad Bill had to leave, but just to go on record, the regulation 10 CFR Part 20, 1301 specifies a radiation level. It's either 10 millirem per year or 25 millirem per year taken at waist height. But what a lot of plants are doing is they are taking some higher level or leaving higher level waste below ground. And I was going to ask Bill if they are planning to quantify the waste that is going to be remaining after the site is decommissioned. I'm not sure there's anyone that has the expertise to answer that off the top of my head, but if I could just take 5 minutes and go through what I put together here in a few minutes.
I know that your slides were shared both publicly and with members of the panel prior to the report.
Yeah,
but...
that works.
Great.
Yeah. Again, thanks very much. And last week I was out in California and I had a meeting with the chairman of the community engagement panel and the management and the engineers at the San Onofre nuclear station. And I've been working on issues out there for quite a long time, and it was a very professional meeting. And there are some problems, but we're talking anyway. Next slide, please. Or can I do it? Oh, you can do it.
No, we're the way we're set up. I'll advance the slides.
Okay, great. Yeah.
It's just easier on this end. So
yeah, just comment on the effectiveness of the decommissioning panel at VUI. Based on my distant and informal observations, you guys run a good show, and I've participated or been a member of various decommissioning panels, including Maine Yankee, Pilgrim, Millstone, Connecticut Yankee, and of course San Onofre. And you guys are conducting very professional meetings. Next slide, please. Yeah, some of the issues we discussed at SOMS, which some of them are issues you might want to look into. The retrievability of spent fuel is defined in the regulation that's stated here. You can get that on the web. We were very surprised when we toured the site last week that they don't have the capability. All their fuel is loaded into these underground casks, and they have removed their canister transporter and crane and everything else. I was just wondering if Vermont is going to retain that. One of the other problems that we identified out there is the inability to detect loss of helium due to chloride stress corrosion cracking. I think a lot of people, the technical people, are very aware of this, and according to Sandia and their gap analysis, chloride stress corrosion cracking is the #1 priority for decommissioning and eventual transportation. It's something that I think the panel should be aware of. Out at San Onofre, the other regulation here, 10 CFR 72122I, requires radiation monitoring in order to detect any leakage. They do not have it at San Onofre. This is from the dry cast. The big issue at San Onofre is flooding. That is not an issue for Vermont Yankee. Transportation is going to be an issue for everyone. And as I said before, residual below-ground radioactivity remaining after decommissioning is something I think this panel should look for. And unlike SONGS, I don't see any immediate safety issues at Vermont Yankee. We're maintaining very close communication. We've had meetings with the chairman of the commission, and we have semi-informal meetings with a very high-level official at the NRC, and at least we're communicating. So could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, there's just something that there's no agreement between the NRC experts like Dave Lochbaum and other experts on this regulation. If you read it, it's one sentence long. It's a very important sentence. I'm not even going to comment. I have my view on what this means. The NRC has their view. Dave Lochbaum has his view. Just be aware of it. There is a requirement to, according to this, retrieve the fuel. Not going to get into any details. One of the other main issues that I just briefly wanted to comment on is tritium, which I haven't seen a lot of activity, bad word, media coverage on tritium like we're seeing at Pilgrim and like we're seeing at Indian Point and like we're seeing at San Onofre. In my opinion, and that opinion of Dave Lochbaum, who most people know he's a super expert, and another unnamed expert, tritium is really not a problem in our minds at the proposed dilution rate. I know Vermont Yankee is shipping it off, but it's a major issue, or people are making it a major issue at some of the other decommissioning plants. Next slide, please. This is just another regulation. The requirement for dry spent fuel storage periodic monitoring, is it sufficient to detect and assure the leakage requirements are met? Just be aware of it. It's an issue. It's an issue with the NRC. It's an issue with me and with, other experts in the field. Next slide, please. Yeah, this gets into the monitoring. I'm just going to read, you can read the regulation here yourself, but for dry spent fuel storage, periodic monitoring is sufficient to provide consistent with the design requirements. The problem we identified at San Onofre is that they have some new homes casks, and these casks are air cooled, but they're horizontal versus the vertical ones. And they measure the inlet radiation of the air, but they don't measure the outlet radiation. And the potential impact of that is due to chloride stress corrosion cracking, they could develop a crack and leak of helium pressure and never detect a crack because right now they're not measuring the outlet monitoring of those new homes casks. Next slide, please. Conclusions, recommendations, this is primarily from songs or San Onofre. Is the radiation monitoring adequate? That's a question for Vermont Yankee. Will VY meet the retrievability? How will Vermont Yankee detect canister leakage? What is the impact of loss of helium on heat transfer and corrosion? And I just want to thank everyone for listening to me. I probably went over my 5 minutes, but I would be more than happy to respond to any questions. And thank you very much for your time and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blanche. And I guess there's a couple of questions there for Corey, just regarding this issue of retrievability at Vermont Yankee. And I know that we had that you were alerted to Mr. Blanche's comments before this meeting. I wonder if you have any comments, Corey.
Yeah, I can speak very briefly to that. I don't want to spend too much of the panel's time on these. Ultimately, these portions of the regulation of 10 CFR 72.122 that Paul is pointing towards are all part of a larger element of the NRC rules. 72.122 in general has to do with design criteria and requirements for storage systems and for ISFSEs or MRSs, monitored retrievable storage systems. And unfortunately, I believe Paul is taking a little bit of freedom with the context he chooses with that one statement in 10 CFR 72.122 Lima or L with respect to retrievability. If you read, and if you want to back the slide up, Tony, to that quote out of the reg, it might have been slide 2 or 3.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. This slide.
So what I would offer for folks who might not be familiar with this is the intent of that particular portion of 72.122 is in the first part of that sentence. Storage systems must be designed to allow for ready retrieval of spent fuel and the waste or the GTCC for further processing or disposal. And ultimately what that design criteria is attempting to describe or require is that the material that's stored within those containers is kept in a manner that when it comes time to move it later, it's not damaged, it's not degraded. The cladding for the spent fuel inside each of the assemblies is still in good shape. The geometry is maintained in a manner that it can support being part of another criteria, Part 71 transportation package or a Type B package to be shipped. But it doesn't mean you got to be able to just hurry up and take it out of the package. There's no urgency or intent by the NRC for that to be a portion of what this part of the CFRs mean. And in fact, there was even some interim staff guidance published, I don't know, a dozen years ago or so, where they had recognized that this term readily retrievable wasn't really well defined. So they went ahead and did that and put it in one of the other documents that they use to help explain that this design criteria is for that purpose and what that readily retrievable means. So I would not worry about that. I mean, this is all part of the licensing and design criteria that each of the manufacturers of a spent fuel or high level waste or greater than class C storage system has to meet and demonstrate as part of their engineered and design process when they get these licensed as the license holder, us as the license user for this system. Obviously, this is important to us, and it gets more important as we get into, aging management. And like Paul had mentioned, if you live on the coast, it's often part of that process where they might perform chloride studies, determine, in their concentrations, what level of salts might exist, what impact that could have on that interior multi-purpose or canister from a corrosion standpoint that could ultimately lead to some type of stress cracking corrosion. But we really don't have that concern where we live here in Vermont, even though we are very careful and take all that into account as well. But I believe this retrievability issue is being misrepresented a little bit here as for its intent with respect to the design criteria.
Well, certainly I'm not, those are the actual words. And, a lay person reading them says, hey, they got to be able to retrieve it. But I don't want to get into a long, drawn out discussion. I know we've had them with other experts. We've had them with licensees, had them with the NRC. The NRC has interim staff guidance number 1, 2, and 3 that discusses it. It's just an issue, and maybe if it comes up again, we can discuss it. But right now, I don't want to take the time of the panel.
Thank you very much, though, Mr. Blanche, for bringing these issues up. And perhaps, Corey, you could just give us or remind us, rather, really of the what is the system for detecting any kind of leakage at the canisters at VY? Could you just give, just so that people, who might be getting lost in some of this technicality, just to remind people what the regime is that you follow in general regarding potential radiation leaks or cracks or problems with the casks at VY? Can you just sort of just remind us of that quickly?
Sure, Lisa. So the design of our storage system is dependent on a number of things, including leak checking all the components prior to the system being loaded, and even leak checking it while we load it and inert it with helium gas before we weld it. And it's actually redundant. There's actually 2 seals. The lid is welded and there's a seal weld. So it's really hermetically sealed. There's no way for anything to escape it unless somehow the containment boundary was breached, which has been determined and accepted by the NRC as a non-credible accident. So this really isn't even something that we are necessarily ever even anticipating to happen. And as folks have seen or probably have heard about or are interested in, have done any research, and these things have been hit by locomotives. They've been run into by planes. They've done extreme testing to attempt to breach one of the overpacks in the storage system, and it's just never occurred. And I want to say there's over 2,000 of these in service in the United States. I don't know how many countries and other SFCs around the world, but to my knowledge, in over 40 years, not one of them has ever breached. So with that said, know that we monitor the temperature. We have a temperature monitoring system that's on all the time. We trend that information. And we also perform monthly surveys, different locations all around the cast to determine if there is any change in the radiological signature. And we also share that information with the state of Vermont monthly.
Yeah. Corey, do you monitor the outlet radiation periodically?
You say outlet radiation, and there's no outlet radiation at all. The can is sealed.
No, I'm just talking periodic surveys.
There's airflow between the annular space of the overpack and the inside canister, but there's no radiation to measure on the outlet.
No, but Maine Yankee and Connecticut Yankee periodically hold a portable meter up to the outlet air. Is that something you would do? It's a simple thing.
It is something we have done and do. We do inspections on the cast multiple times throughout the year, and then we do a comprehensive annual inspection as well as part of it. And we take radiation measurements at all those locations to make sure nothing has changed.
And my interpretation, that would meet this requirement of periodic monitoring. If you measure the outlet radiation with a Geiger-Muller tube, that does it. But see, it's not done at San Onofre. That's where our problem is. So let's put that one to bed.
Okay. That, I think, are there any other questions from the public on any of these issues or any of the presentations that occurred from state agencies and or NorthStar itself? I see Ann Darling's hand is up. Ann?
Yeah, thanks. Perhaps I missed this, Corey, when you were speaking earlier because I got distracted by my cat, but I was wondering what happens with the you're down to demolition of the concrete, right? So you're breaking it apart. I just wondered what happens to it. You're tearing it apart, but where does it go? What happens to it?
And most of that material, if not all of it, with the exception of just a couple of locations, is they will all be shipped by rail car to Texas for disposal in a shallow depth burial.
Okay. And is it stuff that has any radiological activity at all?
Most of it, no, it doesn't. Very minor amounts of tritiation occurs just because the concrete is what I would think of it as a sponge. Concrete is actually quite porous, and the moisture from the humidity goes in and out of it all the time. So it's minute trace amounts of tritiation to be in that concrete, but by no means would you consider it radioactive by any great measure. In fact, in most places, you would reuse it as fill to fill the holes when you were done.
So that was my next question. Is any of it going to be staying here and rubblized and used as backfill or anything?
We have a pretty straight agreement in the memorandum of understanding with the state that we would only use concrete from the cooling tower area and the intake structure and nowhere else for backfill on site. So just those locations that we can reuse some of it. It's a little bit unfortunate that we're shipping all that material all the way across the country when a lot of it could be used safely and economically for fill, but it was the deal that was struck and it's an obligation that we'll meet.
Okay.
Great question, Ann. Thank you.
Okay. I have another question, but it isn't strictly directly related to the presentations prior. So,
well, why don't you go ahead? If it's, a discrete question, go ahead.
I recently heard a webinar or recording of a meeting of a committee with the National Academies of Science. I think it took place in February about the changing weather, the climate situation that we're in, and how people predict maximum possible precipitation and issues with dams and rivers and oceans. How we project when we make a license for something, what kind of things have to be built into design of power plants or any number of things. So, and every nuclear power plant, my understanding from this, had a design basis based on what was predicted at the time that a license was issued. But then when Fukushima happened, and there was a tsunami, and it was my understanding the NRC asked all nuclear power plants to take a look and kind of reevaluate based on current conditions and projections for maximum possible precipitation, if there were any design changes anything that needed to be changed or upgraded at each site. And so I was wondering if that was done at Vermont Yankee, and I think there was a certain amount of I'm not sure how required it was, So was that done at Vermont Yankee, and what was learned? And this would have been after 2011.
And that's a great question, and I'm pretty knowledgeable on that. I actually read the NRC came out with a guidance document. I remember it was 100 and some pages long, but it talked about a lot describing, and it's fascinating reading too, because the percentage of moisture that warmer air can hold makes the average type of storms and max precipitation events that can occur greater by about 7% or so per, I think it's every, I can't remember how many degrees of temperature rise we experience, but it's significant. What I will tell you is that design criteria for all new facilities is being incorporated, and I think they did ask operating power plants to look at that as well. Vermont Yankee had already shut down when that guidance came out, so it did no longer apply to the portion of what we have for our final safety analysis review and our requirements. For the ISFSI itself, know that we work with Great River Hydro, and we have access to all their postulated worst case flood event scenarios and information for all the dams above us on the river and max precipitation events as they understand it. And we have tremendous margin where we are with the height we are to the river and where the river is and the way the river banks work on the, I would say the New Hampshire side of the river.
Yeah.
So with that said, even during the worst weather events that I've seen in 27 years, which was really Hurricane Irene, we had 30 feet of margin still, pretty much. So there's really, I would say that I don't believe there's any event whatsoever that would ever impact the ISFSI at Vermont Yankee. You can rest safe that we are high and dry.
Great. So that's reassuring. So I just
add to this. This is Paul Blanche.
Paul, can you wait to be recognized, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because Anne is still speaking, and I will recognize you if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
So I didn't realize there was that lag time between the time, Fukushima and then the guidance. But it takes a while to create guidance, I understand. So you shut down in 2014, but then there's the ISFSI. You mentioned a consulting firm or a company that you work with on this.
Yeah, we work with them. They share all their emergency planning information with us, and it's the company that owns all the dams along the Connecticut River. So we have contact numbers for the various locations and the way that they work with the state emergency management agencies. And it's actually something we do annually to train all our folks and remind them that we would share and make phone calls and tell people the status of the river where we are, since we're also right above one of the dams. But basically there is a particular dam way upstream, and in a certain amount of time in a max precipitation event, if that dam were to fail, it's the worst case scenario that could occur. And even if it happened, we would have many, many feet of margin before we would even be remotely impacted. Now, what would be impacted is the low-lying areas, the ability for people to get into work, some of the roadways and the infrastructure. But we have a pretty robust system of emergency planning to manage that as well. But it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that one.
Thank you, Corey. What's the name of that company?
Great River Hydro.
That's a nice name, Great River. Okay.
Are there any other
Thanks.
comments before we move?
Yeah, this is Paul. I'd like to comment.
Yeah, one. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just reinforcing what Corey said and responding to Ann's concern. The NRC has done so much work, as the utilities have, and they've done all kinds of flooding analysis pre-Fukushima, post-Fukushima. There's only a few plants that are potentially affected. One is San Onofre, one is Oconee, and we saw Duane Arnold's out in the Mississippi. But with these vertical casks, even though if they get flooded, which they won't be harmed by the water. The vertical cask will just drain the water out, and natural convection cooling will return. So I don't see a problem, Vermont Yankee, in flooding. So if that responds to Ann, and believe me, I've done a lot of work on that area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any other public comments at this time? We're about 20 minutes ahead of schedule on our agenda, which is great. Seeing none, I guess we'll move to a brief report from the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee. And since I chair that committee, I guess I will do that, but I will recognize that Maddie Arms, Marvin Resnikov, Corey Daniels, and now David Eastman are all members of that Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee that does meet regularly. And I would invite any of my fellow committee members to comment if they'd like. I do see a hand up from Emily Davis at this time, so I'm not sure if it pertains to this or previous business.
No, I just, sorry, I just wanted to help you facilitate a little bit, Lisa. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Rebecca,
No,
but
not at all.
Rebecca Ellis had her hand raised before.
Okay, yeah, it's really hard. I've been trying to monitor, but I did not see any hands. So Rebecca Ellis is the state. Oh, great, Rebecca. Thank you so much for raising your hand. If you want to introduce yourself, but I'll just let people know that Rebecca is the state director for Senator Peter Welch, and we're so pleased to have you here tonight. Please go ahead.
Lisa. Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself. I know some of the folks on the call, but not all of you. And as you said, I am Senator Peter Welch's state director. I live in Waterbury, Vermont, and I work in the Senator's Burlington office. So I'm here in Vermont, and I am really just here to listen to you, to hear the reports, and also to make sure you have easy and ready access to your congressional delegation. I know that other staff members of the delegation sometimes are also able to attend this meeting. And just for you to know, I haven't been really deeply engaged in Vermont Yankee issues recently, but I was formerly a Vermont Assistant Attorney General, a legislator, and Deputy Commissioner at Vermont DEC. And I worked on some issues related to Vermont Yankee, probably at this point 15 years ago. I worked also with the Public Oversight Panel from the Act 189. So I worked with David Lochbaum, Arnie Gunderson, Peter Bradford. I'm really pleased to be here. It's fascinating to be here. And, please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have questions.
Thank you so much. Yes, as when the senator was a representative, he had a number of bills that he promoted regarding compensation for communities that host the the spent fuel, the nuclear waste. And I wonder if he plans to introduce any similar legislation in the Senate. Do you have a read on that?
Yeah, I don't have a read on that, but I'm happy to check down with our DC staff. Yeah, thanks.
That would be great. And as I mentioned in our last Federal Nuclear Waste Policy report, Representative Becca Ballant has joined the Congressional Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus, and I checked in with her office. It doesn't appear as if they've been meeting regularly, which is sort of an indication of the pace of federal nuclear waste policy in general. But we're so happy to have you here. And is there anybody else on the panel that would like to query Rebecca while she is available with us right now at all? And again, it's hard for me to see everybody's in the gallery view. So Tony, help me out. If there's hands up, let me know.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hand raised, right? I'm looking at the participants list, and usually the raised hands go up to the top, and
yeah,
I'm
okay,
not seeing
great.
that right now.
Well, that's terrific. So thank you again, Rebecca. And yeah, our Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee meets regularly. We've had some terrific meetings in 2023. Back in March, we had two perspectives on amending the 1982 Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which of course has been coming up time and time again because the legislation, the law is somewhat antiquated and doesn't really deal with the situation that we find ourselves in today. So we had Jay Silberg and Diane Kern talk back then. We've had the Oliver Edelson from that caucus I mentioned late last year. And in June of this year, we had a really interesting discussion on recycling and reprocessing of spent fuel, which the Department of Energy is reconsidering now after a long period of not really touching that issue. So we had Sven Bader from Orono and Edwin Lyman of the Union of Concerned Scientists with us in June to discuss that. And all of these reports, all of these videos are available at BCTV and on the website, as well as a reading list that we've been compiling and a compilation of bills in Congress that Tony has been monitoring. So I think that the committee's been really keeping on top of this issue as best we can. Our next meeting is next Monday, September 25th, when we're going to have two DOE representatives. One is Sarah Hogan, who's from the Office of Nuclear Energy, and Steve Maharis, I believe that's how
yes,
it's pronounced, from one of the national labs, the Pacific Northwest National Lab, which most of you might know are all run by the Department of Energy. And we're going to be discussing current plans for transportation of spent fuel. Even though we don't know where it's going, there's still a lot of planning that's going on. And there's been some preliminary analysis of how transport would occur from Vermont Yankee that we will discuss next Monday. So we're really looking forward to that meeting. And we'll probably, the committee, I believe, has set a date. I don't, maybe Tony knows what the date is, but we'll probably revisit and reset it when we meet next week to discuss the committee's presentation as part of the annual report that's required for the whole panel to present to the governor each year in the legislature. So we do sort of a recap of 2023, and as a committee, we will discuss some of that language that we will contribute for that final report before the end of the year. So that's pretty much it. I would invite any committee members or anybody from the public who has participated in those committee meetings to comment now if they would like, or if there's anything I'm missing or you'd like to add. The time of next Monday's meeting, thank you, John Tuthill, is noon next Monday, September 25th. And the coordinates for that are on the website. It's a virtual meeting, so that goes from noon to 1 p.m. And any preliminary readings, I don't think there are any per se, but they would appear on the website as well. Just looking over my notes here. That's pretty much it. We'll discuss at that meeting too upcoming topics, and seeing no other comments from other committee members at this point. And Tony, I don't see any. Do you?
I'm not seeing anything.
Are there any questions?
Right now, Yeah.
Anybody regarding the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee? At this point, before we move on in the agenda?
Yeah, Lisa, I just want to add, just to remind people, the webcast for this coming Monday's policy committee meeting, it is a new webcast session. The last session we started to experience some connectivity issues for people who are dialing in via the phone line. So since I don't know, sometimes the phone connectivity corrupts. So rather than trying to restore that, which is rather difficult in most circumstances, I just decided, okay, we'll just use a new session. So the information for the new session was just added to the website this morning. So if you look at the Nuclear Waste Policy Committee webpage at the NDCAP website, the new information is up there. We just had the press release approved. It does need to get into wider circulation, but that circulation will happen within the next day or two, and so the new connectivity information will be there as well. So
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Tony. And I encourage all panel members to take a look at that page, if not participate in the meetings, because as we know, decommissioning is not over till the spent fuel leaves Vernon, and that might be a long time. And in the meantime, that's why we're trying to educate ourselves about these issues. And we have a lot that we've already contributed up there on the page. So please avail yourself of the knowledge that we've been developing and sharing, not just with the panel, but with the public at large. We get participants from all over the country at those meetings. With that said, I think we can turn to our next agenda item, which is a discussion of potential panel budget expenditures. As some of you might remember, there was a change in the legislation. I think it was last year. Emily was chair. She might remember, where we have sort of laid out a budget for the panel, and NorthStar has agreed to finance those expenditures of the panel to the tune of up to $35,000 annually. And in the meeting materials that were distributed prior to the panel tonight, there is a preliminary budget that was shared. I guess, Tony, maybe we can get that up on the screen too, if possible.
Bear with me for a second. My
Okay.
screen has gotten a little cluttered here as I've been tracking items. So
Thank you. You're doing a great job, Tony. Thank you so much.
okay. It's finding the right screen again is always the fun part.
Don't
Okay.
feel on the spot. I mean, we had it shared, and I think most panel members probably. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Okay. So this I think most folks are seeing this for the first time. This is just to give a little bit of a review. When the potential for up to $35,000 of panel expenses being covered by NorthStar, that was actually enacted in mid 2021, so it is relatively new. At the time, Emily Davis, who was panel chair when that occurred, did put together just kind of a budget outline. It carried over into the most recent fiscal year. We didn't revisit it, the budget, but since there were some budgetary questions that had come up at the last meeting, I took it upon myself to revamp a little bit of what Emily had put together a couple of years ago, and we just from what I'm expecting panel expenses to be, I did introduce a couple of small changes into the budget, and also And what I'm trying to do is I had a hard copy of it, and as we've been going through the meeting, I have the hard copy has disappeared on me, and I'm having a tough time reading it from the screen right now. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Okay, yes, I can work from this now. So what I have on the screen right now, you'll see the previous FY 2022 numbers. This is what Emily had developed as the panel's first budget. And I looked at those figures and modified some of them based on some current realities. So the numbers that I've come up with, these are in the column that is marked FY 2024. So we do have some increase in the logistics items, simply meeting space rental. If we do have some face-to-face meetings within the current fiscal year, rather than strictly webcast meetings, I could see that those expenses could be as much as $1,500. What that is coming from is an assumption of 3 rentals of our typical physical meeting space, which in years past had been space at either Brattleboro Union High School or at Brattleboro Middle School. The total expense for them is just under $500 per meeting. That's room rental, custodial fees, and there needs to be a security officer present. That's the only way that the schools rent out their facilities. So with that, we come to about $500 per meeting. Other items, most of this next item, meeting video and webcast, this is currently from a contract that the Public Service Department has set up with BCTV. We have variable rates there depending on whether there is an in-room meeting, whether we need an in-room PA system. But most of the time, it's simply web hosting and then the recording of the meeting for rebroadcast. So assuming approximately $600 per meeting, which is the maximum expense. That's if we wind up needing the PA system, and 6 meetings over the course of the fiscal year at that rate. That gives us $3,600. Realistically, we'll be a little bit less than that, but let's be a little conservative on the budget. Last time around, we had talked about potentially engaging a transcription service to help with generating meeting minutes. I left that budget item as is to see whether that's something we still wish to pursue. We really didn't move forward with that the last time this was offered, but it's something that could potentially be considered. We also factor in per diem for eligible panelists. We have a budget there. There I assumed the maximum number of potential panelists eligible to receive the meeting per diem, and assumed that they all received that for a grand total of 6 meetings. Came up with $3,000 as a result. We also have $500 allocated for travel mileage. We talked last time around about a potential staff position to help with running the meeting, generating meeting minutes, meeting publicity, so on and so forth. We had a budget item there. Initially, $12,500 for an additional staff person, with another $2,500 for onboarding. I adjusted those numbers a little bit. They're down a little bit simply because, well, we have more logistics expenses, and we had to bring the budget down somewhere, so that's where I opted to do it. We also discussed about potential infrastructure for the panel, particularly a projector and screen for in-person meetings. Originally, that was put at $2,500. Thinking about that, I thought, well, if we get maybe a video screen, maybe that'll be a little bit cheaper. We can reduce the expense some. Right now, when we have physical meetings, we're using whatever whatever slide projector, whatever screen that the facilities have available. If we're at the schools, they typically have very good, at least a very good screen available, and it's hit or miss on whether we have a presentation projector available. So something to still consider. Website update. We talked about. There was some discussion on this. I'm interpreting this as potentially having a consultant in to assist with revamping the website, recognizing that it is since the panel is a state function, it's subject to state of Vermont standards for websites. So anyway, we have about 5,000 allocated for that. And then the last item is really conference fees and potentially for a panelist to attend an industry conference regarding decommissioning, and also honorariums, potential honorariums for speakers that have been brought in either for committee meetings or for full panel meetings. So there we have some figures as well: $2,500 for conference fees and up to $2,000 total for speaker fees. So that's really what I laid out. A lot of this is, I don't want to say speculative, but it's based on what the panel has discussed in preceding years of what would be nice. Whether we actually get, say, for example, an addition of a staff person, remains to be seen. We would, the panel would need to discuss and improve moving forward with something like that. But this is the layout as we have it right now. So.
Okay. Any comments from the panel about this potential budget or suggestions? And just to reiterate, this would be, we're almost halfway through this budget now by the end of the year, because the fiscal year goes to June 30. So, just wanted to point that out. There's one, so June.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. One is that on the potential staff person, I just want to clarify, we have to be talking about a contractor. We are not talking about hiring an employee of the state of Vermont for that.
Okay.
And secondly, on the travel expenses and the like, Lisa, we had that experience with you this year where, or I guess it was last fiscal year, where you had signed up for a conference, and then I think for reasons you know best, in the end you weren't able to attend. And at the time when we were putting together that package, one of the things that I was a little uncomfortable with was that we had no policy in place. As you know, the commissioner has discretion in the statute as to whether to approve expenditures for the panel, but it seemed to me that we were improvising the decision about whether to send you and how much to authorize. And I was comfortable with where we landed because you got to start somewhere. But I do remember at the time saying that, that we need to, if this is going to happen on a recurring basis, there needs to be some sort of understanding or policy that the committee comes up with for how it wants these funds spent. Because it's not hard to imagine that more than one panelist might wish to undertake such an activity, and then the funds quickly become inadequate. So that's what I have.
Yes, and just to sort of further elucidate that for the panel, the commissioner's talking about the Rad Waste Summit that happens every year, and it's all different national, it's a national conference that's put together by the Exchange Monitor and government people and private industry and different decommissioning communities come together to talk about the status of spent fuel and government policy. And it seemed like a really good networking opportunity, and I was approved to go to that in Las Vegas. It changes location every year, and I became very ill with Lyme disease just prior to that happening, and I couldn't go. However, they did refund, all the monies were refunded for the travel, but the summit itself, I think it was $1,000 or $1,200 conference fee, was not refunded, but they are going to apply that to the conference that will occur June 3rd to 5th in Louisville, Kentucky this year. So I was hoping to attend that and we've already paid for it, so I would go June 3rd to 5th. But I agree with the commissioner, because my main concern there, and I had put it before the different Federal Nuclear Waste Committee members to see if anybody else wanted to go. But I do think that there's value in more than one panel member attending something like that. And I do think that the education component of being a panelist and trying to grapple with some of these issues, particularly as a citizen appointee, is a steep learning curve. And I know that I personally would benefit from attending and putting my attentions to a meeting like that, to participating in the meeting like that. I think it would be beneficial. And I had provided a rationale for that to the commissioner, and that is why she approved it. But moving forward, I would say that line item might not be really sufficient. There's no line there for travel, for instance, Tony. So that there would need to be there's conference fees, there's per diem, and there's also travel. Although I think from my perspective, that looks like an adequate number. Certainly if there was just one person attending, for instance, the Rad Waste Summit in June. And I'd like to hear from other panelists about, whether there would be interest or in some of these other educational and networking opportunities. And whether anybody would like to also perhaps attend that Rad Waste Summit in June in Louisville, Kentucky. So anybody have any thoughts? Dave Eastman? Did you put your hand up there, or was that just a stretch? June, you have your hand up.
I do, because I want to make sure that this conversation is informed by some of the guidelines that I would feel compelled to apply here. Alyssa, as you recall, when I authorized the travel for you, it was also with the condition that you would report out to the committee what you learned there. And while I appreciate that it would be easier if we sent several people to such a conference, that isn't commonly what we do in state government. We simply can't afford that. So on one hand, to the extent that our funds remain unspent, it's something to consider maybe sending more than one person, but I don't think the committee should count on that. Basically, I think the approach should be, you pick somebody, that person represents the committee, goes and reports back to this committee, so that everybody has the benefit of that travel. would be the approach I would want to take. So that's why I'm encouraging the committee to come up with a policy for deciding, how, who, how, what, when, where, how much. And also I have to say that since the pandemic, at least in my agency, the standard has become for people to seek training online. There are some conferences where, you have to travel in person. Tony attends some of those, for instance. But generally speaking, the first option should be to see what kind of educational tools or conferences can be attended online.
Emily, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Lissa. I guess I just wanted to underscore what Commissioner June was just talking about. I remember, and when I was involved with these discussions, and I thank the panel for revisiting it. I think developing the numbers and agreeing to the numbers was pretty simple because it's actually quite generous. And I don't think that, once we determine what the policy is, it'll be that hard. My memory was the conversations tended to get stalled in determining what is the process for approving those expenditures? And the Commissioner Juden was just saying ultimately when it does get to the commissioner's office, this panel doesn't really have guidelines for saying what are appropriate, what is appropriate panel education and what does that mean? And so I think that I think that it's not really, I think again, the funds themselves aren't a problem when stacked against, I think, our historic and maybe, realistic expenditures or anticipated expenditures. But I don't know if that's a conversation. I'm aware that it's already 8:00 and we could stall the conversation longer, but it just feels like that's where the focus should be, is determining what is the policy. When I was when I was helping to steward these conversations, I think it always came down to panel education and panelist and panel education. Acknowledging that as a panel, this is the conduit to the public. So if the panel as a body can be more educated, that has the added benefit of providing education to those members of the public who, are the audience and participate in these conversations. But also the panelists there is, as you said, a learning curve. And so whatever the panelists can do on their own or, under their own prerogative or to help support the panel, it feels like education is the best. So I guess I wonder if, and now I was just sort of had to talk out loud about that, but I wonder if it's if we could, and Commissioner June, this is where I think I would wonder from you, if we were able to agree upon 3 or 4 bullet points outlining and maybe providing a sketch of what, appropriate panelist education would look like on the individual level. And, if the panel were to bring a guest speaker in and educate the panel as a whole, would that be enough guidance or of a funding policy for you on this budget? Or would you want maybe something a little bit more? How would that look? What would that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. All very thoughtful and very typical of you. And if you call me Commissioner June one more time, I'm going to have to wrap your knuckles. So I can be commissioner for this meeting, or I can be June for this meeting, but Commissioner June, anyway, June's fine. But with that said, Emily, it's not so much about me and how I want to use my judgment. It's more to me about how the panel wants to govern itself. And my preference as the person holding all this discretion under the statute is for that discretion to be informed by a firm sense of the panel governing itself. So what, 3 points, 4 points, whatever the panel thinks is a clear expression of its values in terms of how it thinks these funds can be fairly applied and effectively applied. I think that would be an excellent starting point. So nothing elaborate, but something that is clear and that the panel is comfortable with. And I don't know if that means the entire panel needs to discuss this or whether some subcommittee needs to come up with it and then come to the larger committee for ratification. I'm open to all those things, but that's the two bits I would offer.
Emily, I'm wondering if you would be willing to perhaps maybe join with another panel member to, I would share the rationale that I gave to Commissioner Tierney when I thought of going to the Rad Waste Summit. I think that might be an interesting starting point because I made certain points regarding education therein that could help inform a further discussion, I believe. But is there anyone else, anyone on the panel that might be willing to take a crack or form a subcommittee, even if it's one or two people, other than myself, maybe?
I'm aware that David has his hand raised, but I would take a crack at it. Yeah, and have that for the panel soon. Anyone who wants to join, I'd be very happy to work with.
Dave, is that something that you think you could coordinate with Emily on, potentially? You're on mute, Dave. You're still on mute.
Actually, what's interesting is the way I'm reading here, he's unmuted, but we're not getting any sound.
Strange, yeah. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you say.
David, check your headset. I think something came unplugged because we can't hear you at all.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. So, I mean, one is I really want to support the idea of panel members having the opportunity to go to education. And from my own experience, in person at conferences, beat the heck out of Zoom attendance. And, I understand budget constraints, but, I look at this budget and in the overall budget of things, I think this is pretty important. So I encourage spending our money that way. And as far as putting it together, I'm just wondering whether the process that you went through, Lissa, isn't the beginning of a policy. You wrote a justification, you sent it to the person who authorizes it. I don't know if you sent it to the chair, but you might want to add that. I mean, I think the process, if we're talking about process here, is pretty straightforward, and probably what you did. You just have to put it down as steps on paper to make it a policy. But as far as what can be approved and not, I think it's and who. I mean, clearly, when I saw that come up, Lissa, that you were going, it was like everything I've seen. It's like you're the right person, and it's the right meeting, and you have committed yourself to nuclear waste in a way that I don't see other panel members doing, and so you're an obvious choice, and I don't know how you put that into a policy, but I think it can be to sort of limit everyone wanting to go to Louisville next year because it's such a fun city. It's actually not a bad city. I've been there. I'd rather go to Louisville than Las Vegas, to be honest with you. And so Emily, I think it won't take very long. I'd be happy to review it, but I don't have a lot of time or experience with the ins and outs of the government in Vermont to put it together. But if you want someone to look it over and say, yeah, this makes sense, I'd be happy to do that.
June, you have your hand still raised? You're on mute.
I do. I appreciate those remarks and the good faith in which they are made. I have to point out that it's precisely words like obvious choice. As far as I can tell, nobody else. Those are not standards. Those are
I understand
observations.
that. I
And
understand
that's
that.
exactly that's exactly what made me uncomfortable when I got Lissa's email, is that
Uh-huh.
she's definitely qualified, no question. We're not discussing that tonight.
Yeah.
But my point is, where are the other committee members, and do they agree that this is the best use of their training funds? That's what I'm getting at, and we don't have a process for that. So that when the email hits my box, what do I do with it? Do I look at it and say, I agree that Lissa is the obvious person. That makes me uncomfortable. We also have open meeting law considerations that we need to think about too. When people start sending emails, and I forget how many, 3 members are on it or something like that, we run into a problem. So that's where the process needs to be mapped so that it can be done cleanly. And if we have a policy that this panel has approved, that I can apply, then I'll be much more comfortable.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that those comments were very helpful. I agree in the spirit with all of it. And then and I would just point out one more thing, and that is, as much as I appreciate that being in person is preferable for many people, the state of Vermont cannot foot the bill for that, as a matter of course, just because we like it better. Otherwise, I would send my agency staff all over the country for in-person things. We have to pick and choose. And so I think this policy ought to try to at least prioritize when we incur the expense of in-person training as opposed to online training, because there are plenty of resources available online, to include using those funds to bring people in to address themselves to the panel as a whole, which is also beneficial to not just panel in terms of education, but also to the public, who then in turn have the option of reviewing the tapes of our meetings. So I'm doing more talking than I planned to, so I'm going to be quiet now. But Emily, those are just some thoughts I hope that can be helpful to you in writing this or preparing a draft. And I do hope other panel members will join you in that work.
So just to reiterate, it seems as if we have a let's call it a panel education subcommittee that's going to write up a process whereby such travel or attendance or trainings can be approved according to a procedure, and we will vote on it at the next meeting. I think that's time enough, Emily. Maybe we could approve the procedure and have a panel vote on it at the December meeting. And in the meantime, I will share with you what I had developed already, and you and Dave can take a look at it and maybe present it at the next meeting. Does that sound right? Okay, we have a hand raised from member of the public, Ann Darling.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm hearing is that you, with the money that you have, you want to improve the functioning of the panel, both with education and the way the meetings are run, and this is all great. And I'm going to offer a perspective that I've offered before, so it won't surprise you, that I am not hearing in use of this money for public outreach in any. There really has not been a concerted effort to bring in members of the public to the meetings, to doing any education in the community, which I see as one of your roles, and I think it's even in the law. But so I would appreciate it, if it's really something you're not going to do, just to be clear that it isn't a priority, or if it is, to include it in your discussions of how you would use the meeting. How would you make a website that is truly engaging and is going to help you? And how are you going to drive people to the website? And how are you going to bring people in to the meetings? You have a few diehards here, like me. That's not what you need. That, you need, I think, you need, greater public participation and understanding of what's happening in our backyard.
Thank you. And perhaps you would like to offer some suggestions for community education. I feel that, in terms of the Nuclear Waste Policy Committee, we've offered quite a bit of public education and outreach in terms of what we've provided, both on the website and available for, through.
But people don't know about it. And that's what I'm talking about.
What do you want done?
You feel that we need greater public outreach, but perhaps social media outreach. That might be a role if we're talking about a budget item for a further administrative staff, somebody who's contracted to do some public outreach around the meetings that come up. Is that the kind of thing that you're referring to?
You could have a community forum, but you'd have to really do some outreach, not just, a press release.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to go, and as I've said, the Citizens Awareness Network would be happy to help reach out to people, but we can't tell you what to do. I have ideas, but be happy to share them. But I'm not sure it's a priority. I don't hear it as a priority. And I'd like to hear a conversation about it so that it's like clear. What?
Okay. I don't know if there's any other hands raised. I'm looking at my gallery view. I don't see any. But I guess this whole discussion of the budget will need to be approved. I would suggest, or I don't know if I have to make a motion, that we all take a look at this and that we perhaps try to approve a budget at that December 11th meeting, now that we've had this budget in front of us and a chance to discuss it a bit. How would that work in terms of if we don't have a budget committee per se, or perhaps what we're talking about to develop an educational guideline could extend in terms of the budget overall? I'd be happy to participate in a more in-depth discussion about these specific budget items before the next December meeting and present a more hashed out budget, perhaps. What do other panelists think? Dave Eastman.
I was just had a question about what's written here in the budget itself, if I may.
Yes.
When I looked at it before the meeting and it had meeting space rentals, the question I came up with is, do we think we're going to move? I mean, is the reason it's in there is because we're going to move back to in-person meetings? It seems a little strange to have an item in the budget that we approve if we're not also suggesting that we move to in-person meetings, and that $1,500 for space rental, if we're not going to use it, might be better allocated to, some of these other issues. And I guess the same goes for hiring a staff person. If I feel a little bit hampered by being the newbie, but even looking at all of last year's videos, I don't remember any discussion about a staff person over the last year or more that I've watched all the videos for. So again, I mean, that's a big chunk of this budget. It could bring in a lot of speakers or send people to places with that kind of money. So again, there's items in this budget that it seems like we ought to discuss whether we're going to use it for the purpose, or how readily can we take from one line item and move it to another through the year if we decide not to, have in-person meetings through the year. Can we move that and use it when we have exhausted our bringing somebody in to do something. So anyway, I'm just wondering kind of where we go with that.
Me too. And also the projector and the screen, it's the same
Yeah.
issue. We're not having
Right.
in-person meetings. We don't need a projector and a screen. And most of the facilities we would use, by the way, do have projectors and screens available, generally speaking. Emily, you have your hand raised.
And I'm on mute. Yeah, thank you. I think that just to respond to some of the questions that David Eastman was having too, and then I have a general comment. Some of that, I think it's just an awkward relic from 2021 when that was before town meeting had been updated kind of more permanently post-pandemic to allow for virtual meetings. So there was, at the time when that came up, there was some real questions about whether this NDCAP would be able to continue to be virtual meetings. So we were kind of facing the reality of having to go back to in-person. And then there was some questions about, if there's hybrid or, do we have to have bigger spaces if we need to stay distanced? If it's hybrid, do we need to have an upgrade of tech just so that we can accommodate people tuning in from different areas? So I think it does feel a little awkward to look at these numbers right now. And to Lissa's point, maybe I think it's nice to have something to start with and react to, but I think that the conversation would probably be more productive if we could, I think, just feel free to really edit it down. And the same goes for the staff member. I think it's clear that that's was an initial idea and it doesn't actually fit in with the workings and the administration of the public service department to June's point. So I think that that's another thing that was in, relics of old conversations that aren't really relevant anymore. I would say moving forward, I would suggest finding just maybe more broad categories for spending rather than specific line items. And then just, again, establish more of a process that can guide future funding decisions to see if they fit within what NDCAP actually needs rather than having more specific things that we need to identify now, because again, just that's where the conversations got bogged down last time. And if we want to have something voted on that we can actually money that we can work with, I think it's more so about having guidelines and a policy rather than specific items.
Or perhaps we name a budget committee of a number of panelists who would be willing to consider a budget and offer a budget like that, so we don't have to panel time on these individual discussions.
It could be. I think that was floated last time too, and then it was and not to say no, but I think I remember hearing that we weren't sure if every time a potential expense got raised, if timing wise, if the whole panel should approve or if a smaller budget should approve, and then the infrequency of meetings versus do we call everyone, and it's yeah
it's
I don't really have the answer.
Tony, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to go back just for a moment to the point about whether we're going back to in-person meetings. I would point out that right now, as far as I know, the only reason we are allowed to do purely virtual meetings is that the legislature acted to eliminate to eliminate still temporarily the open meeting law requirement for a physical meeting space. So we have that limitation in place, I believe, through June 30 of 2024. After that point, unless there is another change to open meeting law, we do have to go back and designate a physical meeting space. Even if it is just a small conference room, even a conference room in the public service department up in Montpelier would suffice. But that's unless I don't know, some of what David Eastman had said implied that maybe there was a more permanent change, and if there is, I'm not aware of it. So
No, I didn't imply there was. I just implied that when I was reading, it's like, oh, we're going back to meeting in person.
So in fact, for this budget, we don't need to have anything budgeted for in-person meeting because we know through June 30th that there will be no requirement to do so. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, at present, there's no requirement to do so, and that will continue through through the end of the current fiscal year. But I know there are people who prefer in-person meetings. I know Steve Skibnowski was hoping that we could get back to in-person meetings. We did have some at the end of 2021. They were very lonely spaces, being that I had to be there for when we did that. So I was happy that for the present that we don't have to worry about that right now. But it is something. What I foresee is that hybrid meetings are here to stay. Asking some of the for example, June. Or Trish Coppolino to drive 2 hours to attend a meeting in the Brattleboro area, sit through a 3-hour meeting, and then head back to Montpelier, Waterbury, or wherever is a lot to demand for someone. So it's a lot easier for people such as that, coming needing to participate from Montpelier, Burlington, wherever. It makes the hybrid meetings are much more convenient for them. But I understand wanting to have an in-person element. So
I guess for the purpose of our meeting tonight, we're talking about the 23 to 24 June 30 budget. So if there's no general agreement that we're going to not have a public space for the remainder of the year, and we want to sort of vote on that right now, maybe we would at least have that part of the budget covered up to June 30, and we would know it wasn't a requirement. I mean, obviously we're not going to probably spend the maximum number of dollars that we could on this budget. That's not what we're talking about. We just want to have some semblance of a budget moving forward and a procedure. So because we're coming up on the 8:30 and now we're adhering to our agenda time, I would suggest that we go back to this budget, refine it, broaden out the categories, re-present it for a vote at the December 11th meeting. And I don't know if there's any sort of intra-panel discussion that we can have regarding who's going to give their feedback, but perhaps everybody could give feedback on the budget. If you have feedback on the budget, it could be shared with the whole panel between now and say mid-November. And we'd be able to at least inform it with knowing that all panel members have weighed in if they choose to. Does that sound like a plan? Anybody have any problem with that? Because I'd like to move on in the agenda now. So Tony, between Anne.
Thank you. If you want a member of the public involved, I'd be willing to join, but I'm not sure if you do or not. Let me know.
Okay.
Okay.
It doesn't look like
June is shaking her head.
This is I think a panel decision.
Yeah. Okay.
The budget, but certainly your comments are well taken and are being absolutely taken into account. There's no, your comments about outreach, social media, all of that. I think we need to discuss. And will before we present another budget at the December 11th meeting, along with a procedure for approving a budget and also approving the expenditures. So between Dave, Emily, myself, and Tony, I think we can do that before December 11th. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's move on then in the budget unless there's any further comments. Seeing none, potential future meeting topics. Does anybody have any suggestions regarding that? I think Anne might. No. Has already suggested that we consider some type of public forum to educate the public further. And Anne, I'd like to suggest that if you have any more concrete ideas regarding a forum like that, that could be part of the work that you submit them to the email, the panel email, or to one of us personally, and we can convey that back.
Okay.
Tony, you have your
Yeah. Just to clarify what was intended on this item. In some discussions with Steve Skibnowski prior to putting together the agenda for this meeting, we had several individuals reach out to him. I know one person was Bob Leach, who's not here this evening, but there were several other people apparently with suggestions for potential meeting topics. And my thought was, well, perhaps the panel could brainstorm a little bit right now just to see, were there topics that they wanted to delve into a little bit further, such as, some of the items that Anne has suggested thus far. What started this was, I know Bob had, wanted to consider whether the panel should discuss future, potential reuse of the Vermont Yankee site. And there are certainly other items out there. Some of the things that Paul Blanche suggested earlier in this meeting might be something to pursue as well. But that's my input on it. Now I'd rather hear from panel members on what they would like to consider looking at.
Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if June could real quickly tell us like what can and can't we do over email? If we just put out like we have a suggestion for a topic, could we send that to the committee or to the email site? Is that allowed or not allowed? I'm at a loss at just what I can do and can't do in terms of conversations or one-on-ones with other people on the panel.
Well, I appreciate the question, David, and I'm not prepared to speak to that.
Okay.
I am a lawyer by training, but I'm not practicing law in my capacity as commissioner. However, we do have counsel on the line. I think Tony, is Eric still with us?
It looks like Eric is still here. Eric, you're muted, so if you can unmute yourself.
What we'll do for this purpose here, Dave, is I'll ask Eric to look into this. It's a basic open meeting law question.
Yeah.
And he'll reach out to you and let you know. But what you are pointing out is actually another area that I think is something the panel should be focusing on. We have several folks who have joined the panel, including yourself, in recent times, and it's been quite some time since this panel had a basic training like an open meetings law. So, in other words, process type stuff. So I could certainly see that being a good topic for a future meeting where we do a one-on-one on those things so that you have greater comfort. But I think you probably get the concept, though, that there comes a point where when you have communications offline that are substantive with a critical number of people, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head, you run into those sorts of problems. It's not meant to stymie open exchange of ideas. For instance, Tony will often send us communications, and he'll specify, don't hit reply all when you respond to this in order to avoid open meeting law issues.
Yeah.
So I think what we probably could do here that would be simple enough is if folks email topics to Lissa as the chair.
Uh-huh.
And then what?
Lissa, you'll have to figure out then through a process what the committee wants to discuss or not discuss. I mean, that's where your power to set the agenda comes in. You can I think we had on an agenda item tonight to discuss future topics. That's what we're doing right now.
Yes.
But I think given the late hour, folks aren't prepared to have that conversation.
Yes.
And I think, one of the things that I'm noticing from our meetings is our agendas are getting rather ambitious. So we probably could have spent this evening talking about things like, what are good topics for us to be hashing out? How do we want to hash it out? What does additional outreach look like? Just to drop a footnote here, I very respectfully don't agree with Ann Darling's characterization of outreach here. But, clearly there are people who are, interested in doing more, and this committee for quite some time has wanted to do more. So that would be something to discuss, is what does more look like? But we need to then start, thinking more conservatively about how we use our time in these meetings.
Yes, I agree. Well, that sounds, is there any other comments from the public now? If there's anything about the potential future meeting topics, if you've got ideas, do forward them to me and I'll work with Tony and the commissioner to make sure that we're, adhering to all the open meeting laws and trying to, set the agenda for December 11th. And of course, the budget will be one of those items for sure. So we already know that piece. General public comments to the panel. I think there's been a lot, but Anne, one last public comment. And thank you so much for your interest, by the way. Thank you for being here and being interested. Thank you.
Just came back from New York from the climate march yesterday. This is actually about future topics. And I know that the two other folks that often are here with me from Citizens Awareness Network, Skylar Gould and Chris Williams, did have a conversation with Steve Skibnowski about bringing someone here from WCS to talk about, what happens with all the stuff we send down there. And that they reported to me that he seemed very open to that idea.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great. I'm sure.
What was that, an acronym?
I'm sorry, Waste Control Specialist, which is in the same company as NorthStar, the same holding company as NorthStar, is where all the low-level waste goes.
In Texas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That sounds very interesting. There's a lot I'm sure NorthStar could share in terms of potential future topics too. So you guys, you're a real resource for us. You should weigh in also. Any other general public comments? Seeing none. I think our next full panel meeting is December 11th, Monday, December 11th. I do plan to chair that meeting, but let's hope that Steve is feeling better if he is, and he wants to step in again as chair. That would be great, and we all wish him very well. So I guess that's just leaves up. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Second. Thank you all for your time. This has been a real experience. Appreciate everybody's input and look forward to seeing you again in December.